Good evening, parents. Welcome to part 3 of my 3-part mini course, How to Be a Strong Parent Advocate for Your Child. Tonight, we are going to focus on prepare for a successful IEP meeting. So parents, please like and share this video because it helps the algorithms go up. It helps this video go out to other parents of kids on IEPs. And this is such important and vital information for parents to know so that they can gain the IEP that their child needs to be successful in school, to be successful in learning, to be successful in getting the supports and services and accommodations and program that their child needs. Parents, we have to face the facts. If we don't learn how to advocate, if we don't learn how to protect our child's rights, your child is not going to get the education that they deserve and the education that is warranted to them under special education law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is federal law. And it's just not going to happen if you don't learn how to advocate for your child. So that's why I'm doing this 3-part mini-series, and that's why I'm offering the Ultimate IEP Parent Empowerment Program. I've been talking about it on my Facebook page and last night and on Wednesday night. And that's why I'm doing this 3-part series, because I want to offer parents a way for them to learn how to become a strong advocate for their child so that you can secure your child's future after high school. So please ask questions in the chat tonight. Go ahead and ask questions. If you could just write in big caps question when you ask a question, so when I look, I can quickly identify which are questions and which are just comments, because I'm happy to answer any of those questions that you might have tonight, parents. So please do go ahead and ask questions. And please go back and listen to part 1 and part 2 of this mini series. I did one on Wednesday night, I did one on Thursday night, because I'm going to be referring to a lot of the information that I already taught you in part 1 and part 2. And so they kind of built upon each other. So when I'm talking about stuff tonight, I'm not going to go deep into everything that I talk about, because I already taught on a lot of this in part 1 and 2. So be sure and watch all 3 so that you can get the full benefit of all this information so that you can be successful at your very next IEP meeting. If you put these strategies and tools into place at your next IEP meeting, you're going to see a big difference if you listen to these 3-part series for this mini course. So tonight, how to prepare for a successful IEP meeting. So the very first thing that you're going to do, I would take notes on this, parents, is that if you, when I've been talking for the last 3 nights, I'm always referring to an annual IEP or a triennial IEP. So there's different IEP meetings. So you need to differentiate between what IEP meeting is this, okay? Because the annual is something that they're mandated to do once a year to review your child, your son, your daughter's entire IEP program. That's an annual IEP. It happens at the same time. There is a due date for that annual IEP that's clearly listed on the front page of your IEP. It'll say initial IEP meeting. That's the first time your child was found eligible for an IEP, and they are required by law to hold an annual IEP at this on that due date, by that due date every year. So that's an annual IEP. Then there's the triennial IEP, which has to happen every 3 years. They have to reassess your child every 3 years. So it'll also have at the top of that front page your triennial due date. So you can look and see, when was the last time I had a tri and when is my next tri coming up. It's on the very front page at the top. There's a bunch of dates up there that you can refer to and find about your tri. So then there would be what's called an amendment meeting. So when you have your annual IEP, and then you sign it, however you sign it, then you might have another IEP meeting after that, a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, another time, sometime during the school year, you might have another IEP meeting. Well, that's not the annual because you already had the annual. That's called an amendment IEP. So it's an amendment meeting, amending the annual that you had. So whatever happens in that amendment meeting, they're going to change the annual, and whatever was discussed and agreed upon in that amendment is going to be added to your annual. So that's an amendment. Then you might have a continuation meeting. So at any of those meetings I just mentioned, you might not complete the agenda, what you wanted to get done in that meeting, and you didn't complete it. You ran out of time. So that means you'll have to have a continuation meeting to that particular IEP. So there's continuation meetings. So when I've been teaching the past 3 nights, I've been referring to an annual IEP meeting or a triennial IEP meeting that all of this information pertains to an annual or a tri. So if you're having an annual or a tri and you've had assessments completed, then the first thing you're going to do is you're going to request those assessment reports prior to your meeting. Because parents, if you go into a tri or an annual that assessments are being reviewed and discussed, and those findings are being looked at and interpreted, if you don't see that report prior to the meeting, you are at a huge loss. You are in jeopardy of having all that information just fly over your head. You're not going to be able to interpret. You're not going to be able to internalize it. It's a lot of information. There's standardized test scores in there. There's a lot of special ed speak that I've talked about in the other videos. And you have the right to have any information disclosed to you prior to the meeting so you can be an equal IP team participant and an active participant in the discussions and the decisions that are made for your child. If you don't get that report, you can't be an equal IP team member. You can't have feel confident about discussing what they're talking about other than asking a bunch of questions because you don't know what they're talking about. So get the report prior to the meeting and review the report. Then another tip I have for you, that if you have time and if you want to, you can even contact that that assessor, the person who assessed your child and wrote that report. You can contact them and you can say, do you have time? I'd like to set a date with you to review some of these things in the report that I'd like to talk to you about, because that would give you the opportunity to have an informal discussion with the assessor and talk about, can you explain to me what this score means? Can you explain to me what this term is that you use? Can you explain to me what this description was or what your recommendations are? And so you would have that opportunity to be even more prepared when you go to your IEP meeting and be more prepared to be a part of that discussion. So you're going to ask for your assessment reports prior to your meeting. Number 2, you're going to request the IEP draft. I talked about that before too, but this is how you prepare. You definitely get a draft of your IEP prior to your meeting. And all of this is done in writing. It's never done verbally over the phone. It's done in writing. You ask for the draft. And why? Is because you need to look at that draft. You have the opportunity then to look at the previous goals, the progress on the previous goals. You have the opportunity to look at the present levels of academic and functional performance, and you have the opportunity to look at the new goals that they're going to offer your child for the upcoming year. I talked about that in depth last night on part 2. Now, also, when you get the draft, you are going to make sure that you ask your program specialist. You're going to send your email to your program specialist, or you could send it to your case carrier, which is the teacher, the special education teacher, and you have a right to that draft, parents. Make sure you get it. So you would send your email a little early. So send it like a week before, because they're not going to send it to you a week before. They're probably going to wait till the night before to send it to you. So the earlier you ask for it, the earlier you're going to get it, okay? So number 3, you're going to write your parent agenda. Your agenda, what you want to accomplish, the requests you have, the concerns you have, the questions you have that you want to make sure take place at your meeting, because your agenda is going to have all your thoughts, all your concerns, everything you want to accomplish at your meeting right there at your fingertips, and you can check it off as you go through the meeting so you don't forget anything. So you get everything accomplished that you want accomplished at that meeting. I talked about the parent agenda last night in depth as well. You're going to email your parent agenda to your program specialist or your case carrier or both. Number 4, you're going to write your parent statement, which is your parent concerns and priority statement. I talked about that last night as well. Go back and listen if you weren't there, if you didn't listen. Extremely important, your parent statement. You're going to email that to your program specialist and your case carrier as well. A tip: practice your parent statement, okay? Practice what you're going to say. So even though you wrote it down and you sent it to them and you made it a paragraph, a parent statement should not be 3 pages, okay? You want to condense everything that you want to say into approximately, it can be a long paragraph, but it should be a paragraph. It shouldn't be a big, long dissertation of every single thing you're not happy with. That goes on your parent agenda of everything you want to request, what your concerns are, and what you don't understand, what you need clarification are. That would go on your parent agenda. Again, I talked about that last night. So practice your parent statement, because it's written down in a condensed way in the paragraph that you sent. However, when you have the meeting, you're going to have to speak and tell them what your parent concerns are. So I talked about this last night too. If you want, increase in speech and language, you're going to say, I am concerned about my child's speech and language, that the services are not meeting their needs, and I'm asking for an increase to 2 hours a week. I am requesting a one-on-one aid for my child. I'm requesting this accommodation or that accommodation. I'm concerned that my child's being bullied at school. I'm concerned that the IEP isn't being implemented. Whatever it is that you want to put in your parent statement, your concerns and your requests is what you're going to speak at the meeting when they ask you, parents, what are your concerns and priorities for your child for the upcoming school year? That's when you would say that. So practice it so you're ready to state it. Okay, number 5, you're going to write your notice to tape. Okay, you always want to tape record your IEP meetings, parents. Now, it's not an adversarial move. Most parents think, and there's a misnomer that if you tape record your IEP meeting, oh, that means you're getting ready to file for a hearing, or that means you're getting ready to hire an attorney. No, it doesn't mean that. You have the right to tape record your IEP meeting. Now, look at what are the advantages of tape recording your IEP meeting? Many. So the first, and I think the most important thing, is that you have a record of what happened and everything that was discussed at that meeting. So you can go back, and it is a teaching tool. It's a huge record and way that you can further your knowledge about the IEP, because so much is talked about, so much is said, lots of stuff goes over your head, in and one out the other, because you're stressed, you're trying to listen, lots of stuff isn't interpreted during the meeting. You can go back and listen. You can look things up. You can ask questions. So always tape record. It's your right to tape record. It doesn't mean an adversarial move. Also, it's a record of if they didn't document something in the IEP that was agreed upon and approved at the IEP meeting, you have a record because it's in your tape. Lots of times things aren't added in the notes that's on the tape. There are things that people said that they'll say, oh, I didn't say that. Oh, well, it's on the tape recording. So when you tape record your meeting, I'll tell you this. all the misinformation and the misleading of parents that they do when they're not being taped will decrease dramatically. Because when they're being taped, they're certainly not going to incriminate themselves by saying disinformation or misinformation or tell you things that violate your parent rights on tape, are they? So it cuts down with a lot of the strategies and the tactics that they're taught to do in IEP meetings. So when you write your notice to tape, you have to do it 24 hours prior to the meeting, and you just write an email and say, please be advised, I plan on tape recording my IEP meeting on such and such a date. So you have to send it 24 hours in advance, and that's all you have to do. And then you get to tape. Now, if you tape, the district is going to tape. That's always their response. It's not like tit for tat, like, oh, well, you're taping, well, then we're going to tape too. No, they just automatically say, okay, you plan on tape recording the meeting, well, we're also going to tape record the meeting. If you brought an attorney to the meeting, they're going to bring their attorney to the meeting. It's just a response to your request to tape record. Now, remember, I'm talking about California. Sometimes lots of parents listen that are not in California. So in some states, there's different regulations regarding taping. So make sure you look up your regulation if you're not in California, okay? Now this is another little tip that I have for parents. You are negotiating sometimes tens of thousands of dollars in an IEP meeting for your child because special ed services are extremely expensive. So when you come to your meeting, you want to look appropriate. You want to look like you're coming to a business meeting to negotiate your child's future, to negotiate your child's education. So, and I say this because I've had experiences when, people come to meetings looking very inappropriate when this is a business meeting. And it also elicits respect, come prepared, looking professional, like you're ready to do business and you're ready to advocate for your child. That's just a little tip that I have for parents. The next thing, feel confident and empowered that you are an equal IEP team member. Now, I said something last night about when you are professional, respectful, knowledgeable, you know your parent rights, you're fully informed, that, typically when parents do get to that place of feeling really confident and feeling like an equal IP team participant, that when that happens, typically the team will start having better communication, better cooperation. Now, not always, not necessarily. It still might be adversarial. Some districts are just plain adversarial, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens. They're just going to say no to everything you ask for, and it's just going to be adversarial. But when you are confident, when you're professional, when you're respectful to people, when you build relationships, it is a plus. It's going to help you advance your child's IEP to where you want it to go. Now, but I want to make this caveat. Being respectful, being professional, being cooperative and collaborative does not mean that you're a pushover. It doesn't mean that you're going to just give in and listen to, believe their misinformation and the delay tactics or their disinformation, or because, it goes both ways. I have a lot of parents, when they first come to me and they'll say, oh, I'm so concerned about hiring an advocate, or I'm so concerned about disagreeing with something or asking questions or questioning them about this or that, because then they won't like me anymore. Because then I'm afraid that they might retaliate against my child. Because then, I just want them to like me. They're going to look at me like I'm a problem parent, which is ridiculous. Because I can tell you that the parents that know nothing and trust everything they say, that they know because they sized you up and they're taking advantage of that kind of a parent, they don't respect those parents much more than they would not respect a parent who is confident and knowledgeable and is fully informed on their parent rights. So So, I'm confident, I'm respectful, I'm professional, but I question, I argue, I disagree, I state dissents all the time. That's my job, right? Of course, to advocate for what the child needs. So, there's a balance, okay? There's always a balance. So, standing up for your rights and your child's rights doesn't mean that you're not being respectful. It doesn't mean that that you're doing something wrong because you're standing up for your child's rights and you're questioning or you're arguing your position that you have or you're disagreeing. That is your right as a parent. Anything that's an IDEA is your right to enforce. So, parents get that mixed up sometimes. And what I also say is it doesn't matter if they like you or don't like you. That doesn't have anything to do with your child's education. That doesn't have anything to do with your child's future, leaving high school with the skills they need to get a job, with the skills they need to go to college, with the skills they need to live an independent life. Who cares if they like you or they don't like you? That is irrelevant. If you are respectful and professional, then you're doing your job and you're doing it well as a parent advocate. So I just want to also say that early intervention is huge. So it's always so heartbreaking to me when parents come to me when their child's in junior high or their child's in high school and they waited all this time to start advocating for their kid and they didn't learn their parent rights. They didn't have their aha moment I talked about in part 1 and 2 where they woke up to the bureaucracy of special education and how broken the system is. Because earlier intervention, if you don't know, every single doctor, psychologist, service provider, that's what they all say is that if you get your child early intervention, which is 0 to 7, that is the time when you can actually remediate and actually address the neurological pathways that are not working properly, that are not modulating properly. You can actually advance your child to not have problems in those areas anymore if they get intensive and consistent early intervention. Intensive, consistent is the key. So earlier intervention. So don't wait. Don't wait until your child's 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, or let's just wait and see what happens. That's a big push that they say in school and IP teams say as well as, oh, well, let's do this right now and let's just wait and see what happens. And then let's come back to the table and talk about it later, next annual. No, you don't wait. You don't wait. You don't want to wait another school year without your child's needs being met, without your child having the proper behavior intervention, speech and language program, a sensory integration program, whatever it is that your child needs. You don't want to wait because it's not going to get better. The gap, especially the remedial gap in terms of academics, it's going to continue to grow and get wider. The longer you wait, and then what happens is when your child gets into high school and they have to earn the credits to get a high school diploma, they're not going to be able to earn those credits and pass those classes, and they're not going to be able to get a high school diploma, and they're going to end up getting a credential of completion, which is not a high school diploma. So don't wait. Don't waste time. Start learning how to be fully informed now. Start learn how to advocating now. So I want to just quickly tell you about my child's own story, Chanel, what happened with her, which started me on this whole advocacy journey. When Chanel was 3 years old, she was actually a little younger than 3, she was diagnosed with a life-threatening seizure disorder and with the autism spectrum. And the team of pediatric neurologists at UCLA told me that Chanel would never read, that she was never write, and that she would never be successful in school, and that she would never talk. She'd never read, write, or talk. And they, said she's on the spectrum. and she has this epilepsy, severe seizure disorder. So I didn't believe a word they said because I don't believe that anyone can predict a person's future. Okay, so I went home, I started educating myself on special education law, I started reading every book I could find, and I started finding out how I could become a fully informed parent advocate so that Chanel would have every opportunity that she could have to reach her potential. And I was successful in having my local school district award Chanel a non-public school for kids with autism. And at that school, she got every therapy she needed, every support she needed, every goal she needed, every accommodation she needed, every program she needed was all there in that school. And she got that. And then when she came back into the local public school system, they wanted to place her in a severely handicapped class, autism classroom. And I talked about that in part 1 and 2 too. So go back and listen to the severely handicapped class and the different continuum of placement options that are available to our kids in special ed. So the severely handicapped class is the lowest class, basically, that you can be placed in special ed. I knew I didn't want her placed there. I knew I wanted her placed in a general education class with her typical developing peers, where she would have the opportunity to model kids that were talking, kids that had academic strengths, kids that had social strengths, kids that were developing typically. That's what I wanted her to have, that experience and that opportunity, which is our civil right to do for our child. So I was the first parent in my local school district to have their child on the spectrum placed in a general education class called a full inclusion program in the mid-1990s. They weren't doing it back then. They weren't doing inclusion. They didn't have a clue how to do inclusion. So it was really quite a feat and pioneering through how do we do inclusion. And that was back, as I said, back in the early 90s. But the kicker to the whole story is that they were all wrong. The school district was wrong, and the team of pediatric neurologists was wrong, because Chanel did learn to talk. She did learn to read, and she was successful in school. And she graduated with a high school diploma. So they were all wrong. So don't believe low expectations that teachers might tell you, that service providers might tell you, that even doctors might tell you. Don't believe it, because your child has potential, and there's nobody that knows what that potential is until you get everything that your child needs to meet their needs. Then we're going to see what your child's potential is. Once they have the IEP that they need to learn, and everything is addressed that's impeding their ability to learn, then we'll see what happens. So I don't believe in predictions, and especially disparaging predictions when they put that on children. And the sad thing is that parents believe it. Parents will believe the doctors. Parents will believe the teachers and the service providers. And then they just give up on their child, and they just say, oh, well, I just have a child with a disability, and they're never going to learn to read, and they're never going to learn to talk, and they're never going to learn to write. And so I guess that's just going to be my child's life, and I'll have to accept it. Really? No. They don't know what our child is capable of doing. They don't know. Okay. So please don't believe when people tell you that when your kid, I don't care how old your kid is. Okay. So, and I'll give you another good example of that. So I had another kiddo, who was one of my clients, and his name was Alex, and he was in high school, and he was in the 11th grade when his parents came and hired me. So why they waited till 11th grade, I don't know, but they did. What happened was he was in, again, the severely handicapped class, the functional class, the life skills class in high school. And they realized, hey, my son is smart. What is he doing in this class where they're not teaching any curriculum? When he was in junior high, he was doing grade level math. He was doing algebra. He was writing three paragraph essays. And now in 11th grade, he forgot how to do all those things. He can't even write a sentence now. He forgot how to do math because in the functional life skills class, they do not teach academics. They don't teach math. They don't teach writing. They don't teach reading. They don't teach history. They don't teach anything, science, nothing. In those classes, they teach a functional curriculum. So they said, we want our kid put back in a special ed class that teaches real high school curriculum. We think our son can graduate with a high school diploma. So I went, I did my thing, and as I've said, all 3 nights, assessment is where you gain the evidence you need to get the program your child requires and deserves. So we did a whole load of assessments, and we advocated to have that child change placement into a special ed class that was able to allow him to graduate with a high school diploma. Now, of course, he was 10th and 11th grade behind, so 2 years behind in gaining his credits to graduate. So he couldn't have possibly graduated in that amount of time from 11th to 12th grade because he was 2 years behind in credits. So what happened is he had to go into a credit recovery program where he had to make up those credits when the district unlawfully placed him in a functional class when he should have never been placed in a functional class. This kid was super smart. Yeah, he was on the spectrum. Yeah, he had some speech and language deficits, but he should have never been placed in that functional class and taken away the opportunity for him to graduate with a high school diploma, for him to stay learning how to write and read and write essays and learn history and learn everything else that every other child gets to learn in high school. It's discrimination, really, is what it is. So that's, just another good example to you. Another young lady that I know, she had dyslexia all the way through school. She never got served. She's a beautiful, beautiful young lady. Now she's about 24 years old. But she told me her horrifying story that when she was in school, she had dyslexia and she had an IEP, but they didn't do anything for her. They didn't help her learn to read. They didn't give her the proper specialized academic instruction, minutes and frequency and duration. She was made fun of. She was bullied. Her self-esteem was damaged because of the experience in school. They just pushed her through. So she did graduate, but she didn't earn those credits. They just pushed her through because she they didn't want to. See, it works both ways, okay? So when you have a kid that needs services and that is obviously disabled, like a kid with a language disorder on the spectrum, those kids, they're going to want to segregate and put into the severe classes. But the kids that are high functioning and have like a learning disability or dyslexia or something like that, they're just going to push them through and do nothing for them. And so she left high school and she didn't have the skills to be able to pass the test, to go into the Army and to become a pilot, which was her dream all of her life. And she couldn't do that, and she's still heartbroken about it. And she told me that she still has a very low self-esteem, and it still affects her today, her experience that she had all the way through school. Because all the kids knew she couldn't read, she knew she couldn't read, she could never keep up with the curriculum, she could never do the work, and it's heartbreaking. So these are some of the stories that happen to kids when parents don't learn. And the mom, this is the point, is the mom talked to me and said, Valerie, how I wish I would have known you then, that you could, I didn't know any of this stuff you're talking about. I had no idea that I could get help for my daughter. I asked for it, but they never did anything. I asked for it over and over again at every IEP I went to, but they never did anything. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to ask for. I didn't know how to advocate. And I didn't know my rights and my daughter's rights. And it's heartbreaking. Now, this happens tens of thousands of times across the nation because there's over 7 million kids on an IEP in the United States. So these are, you can either have an amazing outcome or you can have a heartbreaking outcome, like some of those parents have had. The other scary thing is that a lot of kids will end up getting into trouble with the law, because when kids can't keep up in school, especially males, this happens too, and they're high functioning, like they have dyslexia or learning disability or ADHD or OCD or depression or anxiety or something like that, they'll get in trouble with the law because they're going to act out because they can't keep up in school. So then they're ostracized and made fun of, and they're kind of the outcast, and then they end up being rebellious and getting in trouble and getting in with the wrong crowd, and then they end up actually in jail. Another mom I know, I heard her story. That's heartbreaking. Her son's in jail right now. He's in his early 20s. She said the same thing to me. Valerie, had I known that I could have advocated for him, that I could have gotten him help in school through the IEP, he would never be in jail today. And so, these are the scary stories that can happen if we don't get the kids what they need in school. And that IDEA allows our children to have, yet the school district is not going to offer it unless we know what our rights are and protect those rights. The other thing I wanted to mention is Channing Tatum. He had dyslexia. He has dyslexia, and he talks about it all the time. He talks about being in special education. I don't know if you guys, maybe somebody of you don't know. Channing Tatum is a huge, famous actor, and he talks about how his dyslexia in all the way through school, especially high school, what a horrible experience it was for him. That kids, same thing, made fun of him. He was an outcast. He couldn't read. He couldn't keep up with the curriculum. He felt inferior all through school. He couldn't learn, because if you can't read, you're not going to learn. So, and he talks about, this is the kicker, is that he says the system is set up to assess children's abilities through tests that kids can't be successful at, which is true. So many of those assessments that they give our kids, that will determine their present levels of performance and their deficit areas. Lots of kids can't take those tests. Some of these kids are above average. Some of them are gifted in their IQ, in their intelligence. But it's not going to come out in those standardized test scores because they can't understand those tests, what they're asking them to do, what the right answer is, because they haven't written assessments and tests yet, especially for kids on the spectrum that have speech and language deficits. So he could never, take those assessments. Because he couldn't read, and he had dyslexia, so he scored very low on the assessments, and he had the same experience as that young woman I just told you about. So our kids just can't do well on those standardized testing that is used as the baseline and the foundation to develop an IEP. So it is a huge, it's just so important, parents, that you learn how to advocate for your child. There's everything available to your child that your child needs to address their deficits is in IDEA, and you can get it. So here's another really good example, really fast. So I had two twin boys. They both had cerebral palsy, and they had a bunch of other medical issues. They were profoundly medically impaired, and they were in chairs. They had a feeding tube. They had special medicine. They couldn't really move their bodies very well. Well, I advocated for them. I got them their own nurse. They each had their own nurse because they needed nursing care. They went to school. They went to high school, and they continued to go to school to continue to learn. They had assistive technology to speak for them. They had their own nurse. They had a teacher that would come to the home as well and teach them in the home. They had special transportation, busing, their own little van that would, because they had to be a special, ramp van that would go pick them up in their chair. I got them everything under sun that they needed, plus the speech and language, plus the occupational therapy, plus the physical therapy, plus the behavioral intervention, everything they needed so they could still go to school. Now that is a really, unusual story. It's not typical, but that's just an example that I want to try to tell you that whatever your child needs, your child gets. It's just that you don't know how to get it. Some of the programs I developed were $75,000 a year programs for some of these kids, because that's how much the services cost that they needed to learn and to meet their needs. So these are the things that are available, and that's why I'm offering my ultimate IEP parent empowerment course. That's what I've been doing the past 3 nights, is to tell parents about this course that I wrote. And what I did is I took my last 23 years of experience going to more than between 3,000 and 4,000 IEP meetings. So I have all that experience and advocating for thousands of kids over that time. Now, some of those thousands are parents that I just consulted with, parents that I trained and coached, and then many parents I actually was their advocate and went to IEP meetings with them. And I took all that information and I wrote a course. It's a 7-step course. It's a 7-week class. And I put all of that information into layman's terms. So I took the law and I put it in layman's terms so parents can understand it and you can apply it to your own child's IEP. So, there are other programs out there. I know some other advocates that offer some parent training programs, but I think the difference of what mine is that I help you understand how to apply the law to your own child's IEP so you can be successful. Because it's one thing knowing what the law says, but it's another thing, how do you apply it to your child's IEP and when? I went to Virginia to the William and Mary Law School to get my advocacy credential, and I just want to tell you that when I went there, they didn't teach me how to advocate in an IEP meeting and when. They taught me more about the law. We studied case law so we could understand IDEA better, and in-depth law stuff is what we learned. But they didn't teach me how to advocate at a meeting. They didn't teach me how to come back when they, say their little delay tactics and when they pull their little misinformation and misguidance and what they do in IEP meetings. So that's what I do in my course, is I teach you, this is what they're going to do. These are the things they're going to say, and these are the things you can say. And here it is in the law, how you can apply it and how you take the law, your state code or your and also federal IDEA law, and apply it to your own child's IEP. And I break it down into layman's terms so it's very easy for you to understand and start winning at your next child's IEP meeting. And the other point I want to make is that yes, absolutely, you can hire an advocate to speak on your behalf and to help you, but you're going to have to do that until your child leaves high school. Because if your advocate comes in and wins everything for you that you need for your child, and you're happy because the advocate got you what your child needs, the second that advocate's gone, what do you think is going to happen? The same thing that happened before your advocate was there. They're going to start taking everything away. And it's happened over the years zillions of times, because every time a parent let me go, they would call me ultimately within a year or 2 years and say, Valerie, I need to hire you back. They took everything away because they didn't learn their parent rights. They didn't learn how to sustain the program that I got for them. And that's what happens. So even if you hire an attorney, say you go to a due process and you win what you wanted in the due process, and then the attorney goes away when the due process is over. If you don't know how to advocate, it's just going to start all over again. And why is that? Because IEPs don't remain in place until your child graduates from high school. because at every IEP meeting, at every annual and triannual, they can change anything they want to in that IEP. They can change your child's placement. They can decrease your child's services. They can take your child out of special education, say they don't even are eligible anymore. So either way you look at it, you have to learn how to advocate for your child. So the Ultimate IEP starts this Sunday at 12:30 Pacific time. I put the link in our live tonight, so go check it out and you can learn more about it. It is a 7-week course, as I mentioned. There's videos, there's audios, there's a lesson every week, and then we meet live on Sunday afternoon at 12:30, and then I go through the lesson and I coach you and I answer your questions and I help you apply that lesson to your child's IEP. So let's see here if we have any questions that I can answer for you. Should we then all choose to place our children in general education class? Good question, Liz. Okay, so then we're talking about the least restrictive environment, right? So the least restrictive, and I talked about this last night, the least restrictive environment. So, go back and listen. I talked in depth about it. But the least restrictive environment always starts, this is the continuum of placement options in special ed. So general ed is the most least restrictive environment your child can be in, because it's the typical classroom. It's the general ed environment. That's the most least restrictive. This is the law, that your child must be placed in the most least restrictive environment possible to meet the needs of your child. So, general ed class you started out at. Now, is it appropriate? Would that be the most appropriate placement for your child? I don't know. Every child is different. Every child is individual. Every child has different services. Every child has different deficits. So you have to make that determination. Is that the most appropriate, least restrictive environment for my child? And if you think it is, you have the right to have your child in a general education class. Now, the only time that they're going to really fight you on putting your child in a general education class is if your child has significant maladaptive behaviors or disruptive behaviors that disrupts the classroom, disrupts the teacher from teaching, disrupts the other kids from learning. They can say, we cannot put your child in a general education class. But it's still a very gray area, because really it's your civil right to have your child in general ed and not segregated into a special education class, okay? So now the next one would be the first level of special ed class, which is the RSP, the Resource Support Program, taught by a special ed teacher, but they teach the exact same curriculum as general ed. And it even looks exactly like a general ed class. The only thing that looks different is it's a smaller class size. There's less kids in there. They probably have a couple classroom aides. They go at a slower pace, so the rigor isn't as fast as in a general ed class. And they have other built-in accommodations for most kids that need a special ed class. But it looks very, very similar to a general ed class. And there's lots of kids that are in resource classes, kids with ADHD, kids with dyslexia, kids with other health impairment, different kinds of medical issues, anxiety, depression, things like that. Kids on the spectrum can be in our resource support class. So then the next one would be the functional class. After that, the severely handicapped class that nobody ever wants to put their child in. I don't care how significant your child's disability is. Don't put them in the severely handicapped class, because it's a babysitting class. And I mean, only the most profound kids that have disabilities should be in that class. And it should be very, very small amount of kids, because most kids should not be in that class. Yet they misplace them and put them in that class all the time, because it's easier to just stick them in that class where they're completely, it's a self-contained class. They never leave that class. They're never around typical developing peers. They don't go to lunch with the typical developing peers. They don't go in the hallways with them. They come to school after everybody comes to school. They leave school before everybody leaves school. You basically never see these kids. So I think it's segregation, and I think it's discrimination, and I really don't know why it's still legal to have these classes, but it is. So don't be fooled by them if they say, oh, we think your child needs to go into a functional class or a life skills class, and they'll make it sound really, really good. They'll make it sound so wonderful for you. But when parents don't know these terms, then they don't know what the class is. They'll go, oh, of course, yes, we teach your child everything that they need to know. Yes, we're going to help your child become independent because we're going to teach them, all about money. We're going to teach them how to go to McDonald's and order their food independently. And we're going to teach them how to count change. And we're going to teach them, how to have a checking account. And we're going to teach them functional skills. We're going to teach them how to ride the bus. We're going to teach them what the difference between the ladies' room and the men's room, and how to read signs, and how to cross the street on a green light and be safe crossing the street. These are the skills they work on. They don't work on learning anymore, a curriculum that other kids learn in school. So it depends. That's all I can say, because it just depends on each child and what you want for your child. Okay, question. Do you have to have an IEP meeting to request your child to be in an inclusion with general ed, or can you just request through email? So, nope, that's a placement decision. It's a placement request. That general ed class that's placement. So as you know, I talked about it last night, the order in which an annual and a triennial goes, it's the same order as the IEP document. And it starts with assessment, then it goes to old goals, then it goes to present levels of performance, then it goes to new goals, then it goes to accommodations, then it goes to services, and last is placement. So when you get to the placement part, that's when you're going to say, I'd like my child placed in a general education classroom. You have that decision. You have that discussion. Now, if it's not an annual or a triennial, then you would have to call an IEP meeting and say, I want to discuss placement for my child. Okay, now they're going to fight you on it, especially if your child's behind grade level. They're going to fight you really super hard on putting your child in a general education class, because in a gen ed class, they're going to have to modify that curriculum a whole heck of a lot for your child. So say they hand out a lesson and your child can't add yet, but yet they're working on two-digit addition problems. So what is your child going to do? Well, they can't just sit there and do something completely different while everyone else is doing something else. That makes them stand out even more, right? That you want to fit them in and have them included as much as possible at all times. So they have to modify that lesson to where your child can still take be involved in that lesson. So it might look like if they're working on addition, then they would have your child work on learning addition while the other kids work on their two-digit addition problems. So the curriculum would have to be modified. So it's a huge discussion. It's not an easy task, but it can be done. Okay. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, I think, any other questions, guys? And the team action notes, they never write what they say. Yep. Okay, I think that's all the questions, guys. So I hope to see you in the Ultimate IEP Parent Empowerment course, guys. The registration closes tomorrow because it starts on Sunday. So tomorrow at 5 o'clock, registration closes. If you don't register tomorrow by 5 o'clock, then you won't be able to start with us on Sunday. So please make your registration now, and please don't wait to learn how to become a parent advocate for your child and secure your child's future. Secure your child's education while they're in school, and hold your local school district accountable to meeting your child's needs so that they can access the curriculum, so they can progress from year to year, so they can learn and they can reach their potential in life. So thanks everyone for joining me tonight, and I will see you at the Ultimate IEP on Sunday at 12:30. Bye everyone.